Hello and welcome to another Writerly Witterings. My name's Michael Jex, this is a cup of tea, I'm happy. Cheers. Today, being Tuesday, I normally talk about the latest book I've had to review, but no one sent me any books for a while. I've got one which I still have to get through, which is Jamal Evans' Of Blood Exhausted. I'm looking forward to that because I know Jamal and his work, and that I think is going to be very interesting. I've also got a book, Arthur, which I haven't managed to read yet. Those two have been sent to me to review. There's also Megan Knight's latest book. I'm worried now because the dog's behind the camera on a window seat and I'm worried she's going to knock the camera over. But she hasn't. That's good. Yes, Megan Abbott, Give Me Your Hand. I haven't read that yet. It was highly recommended by a friend at Waterstones, so I'm looking forward to coming on to that. But since I haven't got that, I thought what might be useful would be to review some books that I read a long time ago and which have been particularly useful to me. These are Maurice Keen's Chivalry and Terry Jones's Chaucer's Knight. Now, what makes these two books so good? This is a 5-minute review, so I'm going to have to zip through the pair of them. Chivalry, Maurice Keen is very academic. This gives you all of the basics of how knights were trained, how they were taught, the concept of polite manners. Every other aspect is in here. And it is a fascinating book. But in Chivalry, what you'll find is a complete history of how chivalry developed from the very earliest days of murderous thugs into the courtly love and other much more romantic background to history. Chivalry is a brilliant book, I found, for me, because it gave me all the detail I wanted at first. But then my wife bought me this, Chaucer's Knight by Terry Jones. For students of English literature, Chaucer's Knight was the classic perfect example of a knight. He was chivalrous, he was no doubt handsome, he was well behaved, he was gorgeous. Terry Jones looks at this from a slightly different perspective, because Terry points out all of the other characters in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales tend to be built up and built up and built up, and then he drops them in the next line. And it always perturbed him when he was at university that Chaucer's Knight seemed to be the only character who was treated with such high esteem and regard. And so he decided to look into it. He didn't write this at university. Terry Jones is obviously much more famous for being a member of Monty Python's Flying Circus, but he was an extremely good historian in his time. So he decided to pick up this story and see whether he could analyse Chaucer's Knight and come up with a slightly different conclusion. And categorically, Chaucer's Knight was not a perfect gentle knight. Chaucer described him as such because he was building up the character and then he ripped him to shreds. Because this was written at the time of the 100 Years' War, when English knights were roaming all over France, slaughtering people, robbing them, plundering whole cities, raping nuns, devastating churches, and this knight was one of them. He was a mercenary. He was one of the most evil people that Chaucer could conceive of, as is demonstrated by this book. Every single line is analysed. The knight as an efficient killer, and "aye slain his foe," from the general prologue, or "and always slain his foe," and "fought for our faith at Tramesine in Listis Threes." It demonstrates here that Chaucer was acting as a mercenary fighting for Muslims against other Muslims, as an efficient killer. At mortal battles had he been 15, so he'd been at 15 different battles. This seems to build a picture of a brave, noble warrior, doesn't it? He killed at least 15 men, we know from that, because a battle could be joining in a battle in a war, it could be just a combat between two men. And it says he always killed his foe, "ane slay his foe." Now that's great, except, is that such a good thing? Knights weren't supposed to automatically slaughter their opponents. This is a demonstration that he's just a homicidal maniac. It's not, and this is Chaucer. This is the attitude that Chaucer would have had. This is not imposing 21st century views on them. Knights were supposed to be honourable men who in a battle would respect their opponent, and if their opponent submitted, they'd say, okay, I've captured you, I will ransom you. So he would take his opponent prisoner. He was not supposed to just murder for no particular reason. This is, I would say, a devastating analysis of a character who was a mercenary, who fought in wars where he shouldn't have been. He travelled over to other countries when, by law, under Edward III, it was illegal for him to do so. He didn't necessarily join up in battles with the king when he was called. He was the perfect example of where chivalry had gone entirely wrong. Terry Jones shows that. I can't recommend this book highly enough. I've spoken about it before in other venues, but Chaucer's Knight for me is the best analysis of the character, but it's also a depiction of that time. He explains about the period, he explains what was expected of knights, he explains so much, and it's beautifully readable. Maurice Keen's book is very, very good. It has lots of information, but this book you will not be able to put down. It is a thrilling tale, supremely well told by a master writer. Terry Jones, fabulous, fabulous writer. So, there you have it. Now, back to my tea. If you liked this, hopefully some of you will have done, comment down the bottom, please subscribe, hit the bell so you're told when there's another video, like it, share it amongst your friends, and also if you like this video, have a quick look at my Patreon page. I've got a link down the bottom, and there's other stuff there which Patreon makes it much easier to have blogs, videos and everything else all in one place. So if you like this, go there, have a look at that, consider supporting me on Patreon if you want to, and I'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Cheers, take care. The main thing you can tell from this is how important it is from the number of different page markers I've put in. And I have this habit, whenever I read a book, whatever I use as a bookmark that time will generally get left in there, and that gives me a little history of when I last read that book and what was going on in my life. But with this, Ralph avoids the freedom because he's too worldly. Note, the boy bishop freedom. On choir, Jolinda almost drops something, Stephen, page 16. So this is when I was writing, I think, the boy bishop's glove maker. I'm not absolutely certain because it's a long time since I checked the names in that. This one, why should Jolly be unnecessary if Peter lived, page 78. So Peter was clerk to Carvinel. Very interesting. I've no idea what any of these notes refer to. And then I've got a brilliant set of notes which is just numbers. Not the faintest idea what that's about either. But